Hi Stonington, thanks for tuning in. We are so honored to have Chief Erskine with us today. He's going to tell us some of the work he does outside of the police department with his local historian hat on. So we were really excited that you offered to come and share with us some of the great history you dug up on town, particularly around sports in town. So with that, I'll let you share with the viewers a little bit of your history and findings.
Okay, thank you for having me on, and good morning, Stacy. I got started because I was on the Stonington High School Athletic Hall of Fame committee, and still am, and I did a lot of research on the graduates, like in the teens, and the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and I came up with a lot of information, and so then when I retired from the police department in 2008, members of the Stonington Historical Society asked me if I would come on in. Connaughton was the main one person, and so I joined the Historical Society Board of Directors, and I'm in my 11th year now on the Board of Directors. So I've done programs at the high school in regards to the police department, sports, the military, the people that died in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. But in regards to sports, I've gone from like 1900, and the four sections of town has been very, very good to each and every one of the residents in the town, because we've had a lot of people who have donated things. I found that out in my research. Like in Old Mystic, they had the Sidwick Field there where it's behind the church. I believe the church owns it now. Down there where Haley Street was, where the old Mystic School used to be, and then they tore it down, and they're still using that field. Then we move along and you go to Rossi Field. Well, Mr. Rossi donated that field to the Little League, Mystic Little League in 1950. And then you go down to Williams Beach Park, and Mr. Williams donated all that property to the Mystic Community Center, and they've allowed those fields. So those fields have all been going for like almost 70 years now, so or better. And when you move into Stonington, you got Owens Field, and that's the oldest field going at the present time. They started out playing in Walnut Grove, and Walnut Grove was up off of Route 1, which Route 1 didn't come through there, and from Stonington Meadows to Stonington Pizza. That road didn't come through there until 1939. So part of that golf course was up there. There was a golf course there, Stonington Manor, from 1925 to 1975, where around the cove there.
That'd be pretty.
Right, it's pretty. And that was all a golf course, a 9-hole golf course. That was the only golf course in town at the time. And they played there, and then the people down here in the borough area said, geez, let's get closer to town. So they had Stanton Park. Now, Stanton's owned the big house here by Owens Field first. Then they sold it in 1917 to the Owen family. Now, you gotta remember, there was no viaduct there. The viaduct didn't come through until 1940.
Okay.
All right, so when you went into the borough, you either went down North Main Street or Port Crossing, Elm Street, or North Water Street. You had to go across. And so that field opened up in 1909, and in 1917, they started calling it Owen Field. Now, Stonington High School was at the Borough School, the 3rd floor.
Yeah.
And the Borough School was the high school and a grammar school. And sometimes there in the late 30s, there was some 700 or 800 students at that school. I always look at the area, and I often think when they always say the roaring 20s, well, the town of Stonington was the roaring 30s, really, and there's so much history in the 30s, and people didn't get along with one another. They were fighting. Each section of town wanted their area, like Pawcatuck wanted it, the high school there, Stonington group wanted it over here. So Stonington High School played their football games at Owens Field.
Okay.
And the last football game that was played there was in November 11th, 1934, Wesley Stonington Veterans Day. And Morris LaGrua Center, he threw a pass to a guy named, I'm trying to think of his name. He lived down here on Elm Street. I can't think of his name right now, but they beat Wesley 7-0, and that was the last football game there. Now they get arguing about where they're going to play, the Owen family went to the town and asked them if they would give that property to the town of Stonington if they didn't have to pay taxes for the next 15 years. And at that time was a person named Attorney John Gallagher, who was a town attorney. And he's in the Stonington High School Athletic Hall of Fame too. And he said, no, they can't do that. So Miss Owen started charging them. And they charged them $81, and the principal of Stonington High School had to go around knocking on doors to get the
Fundraising.
the rent, pay the rent. So they came up with a petition, and they kept talking, where are they gonna buy it? Okay, so the town of Stonington, the property down here at Owens Field was offered to Stonington, 6 acres for $5,000. Now, out there on where the Stonington High School is presently, they call it the Mandel property. And it was across the street, from where the police department is. They called it the White House, and then later on they called it the Orchard House that was there.
Okay.
So there was 143 acres there, and that was $6,000. So they have a petition in April of 1935. We're gonna have a town meeting, those are the two things they're gonna vote on. So the people in Stonington, now you gotta remember, there was no footbridge here either.
Okay.
Because the viaduct and the footbridge didn't come in until 1940. So Stonington's fire department's fife and drum corps get the 175 people down here, and they march up Elm Street, march up to here. And upstairs was all just an auditorium then. And they didn't fix it up until about 1970. So they started putting offices upstairs because they outgrew the thing. So anyways, they had a big meeting, and it went on. It was over 1,000 people at it. And I always say that was the biggest town meeting they ever had. And that's when they voted to go out to Stonington out there.
That's so interesting.
And in 1935, the first football game was played out there.
Did we
And
win?
then in 1937, it was dedicated. They put the track in and so forth. And at that time, Stonington didn't have basketball. There was no basketball from 32 to 39. They didn't have a place to play. And then the new school was built up at Portland Junior High, which is the Portland Junior High. That's where Stonington High School was from 39 to 57. So Stonington in 1936 and 37, 39, 40, 42, and 44, they were Class B state champions in track. And a lot of those gentlemen are on the Stonington High School Athletic Hall of Fame. And Pawcatuck, that field was all, they didn't build a high school out there until started building in 1955, but the first Little League field in Pawcatuck was out there.
Oh, okay.
And they played there for a couple of years, and then they had to move. Now they moved up to Liberty Street, where Phoenix is. Phoenix Restaurant was there, but it was called Rossellini's then.
Okay.
And then they had a field there. Then they had to move from there, and they moved up to Route 78 and Liberty Street. Mr. Maine, Chet Maine had the property up there. And that's when they put the bypass through, so they had to close that down. And Mr. Maine sold the property to the town, to the state, and then he turned around and gave the money to the Little League. And the Little League bought the property they are now on North Angola Road.
Oh, nice.
So they're lucky. Stonington's always been lucky, Basketball-wise, Stonington really didn't have any basketball. They didn't have any basketball from 32 to 39. In Mystic, they played in St. Patrick's Hall. It was not the present one, but the one before that.
Okay.
And Fitch played their home games there. Fitch didn't become a high school, and Brown didn't have a high school until 1929. So they played their home games there. Here, Stonington played their home games, and there's a picture of it in there, and there's a church going down the Water Street. You see it in Cindy's office there, down there going there on the left, the big church. That was a church. Then they called it Ryan's Hall, because Ryan's family lived on the corner. The house is being renovated down there now. And then they called it the Stonington Community House. And the Stonington Community House was another person, it was a guy named Ed Bradley, one of the founders of the Mystic Seaport. He bought that for a community house for the town of Stonington.
People are so generous.
Yeah, they were generous, they really. And the other place they played in was the old Stonington Community Center. And it was first called Arian's Hall, then it was called the American Velvet Employees Club, Then it was a community center that started in 1945 there.
Okay.
And then in Pawcatuck played down at the Majestic Hall down on Cogswell Street.
Okay.
There was a Majestic bowling alley down there also. And then in 1939 was the first time Stonington really had a gym. They opened up the gym in 1939, the school in 1939, June graduation, and they used to hold the graduations up here, upstairs in the town hall, because they didn't have any room down there. And so they voted, and they had that school over there, and they dedicated the gym. Wesley and Stonington opened it up. Some Wesley beat Stonington 159 to 12.
Ooh.
And there's a lot of people, the old timers I had for school teachers like Mr. McKenna and Stigney and Mr. Shea and all of them, they never forgot that. And so Stonington had a great football team in 1942. Out of the starting 11, and it was all state, a starting 11, 4 from out of the 11 were all staters. And the 35 gentlemen on that team were all World War II veterans. And they're considered the best team. They were ranked second in the state. Only New Britain was ahead of them.
Oh, wow.
And they wanted to bury Wesley that year. But Michael Cronin, who was the coach, and legendary coach, and he wouldn't allow it. But they had some great football teams. Say there was no basketball, so it was all football and track. And then basketball, kind of from like the middle 40s to right to about 59, 60 was the best times for Stonington in basketball. Stonington won the state championship in 1950. They had a gentleman named Phil Jones and Bob Gilmore, and those guys went on to play college basketball. And I always say the best, the biggest victory and the best team that they had was in 1956 when Stonington had Wayne Lawrence and Pete Arnold, Jimmy Kavanaugh, and them. And I often think, and it was always the biggest victory. See, that group was for 4 years in high school. They went to the semifinals in Class B and got beat semifinals East Haven. Freshman year, sophomore year, at semifinals East Haven. Junior year, East Haven, semifinals. Well, let's start. Wesley had, East Haven had a 79-game winning streak. Now, they play East Haven in the finals. My father took me and 3 or 4 other guys. I was in the 6th grade. Stonington beat him 62 to 60. And the following year, East Haven went to the semifinals again. East Haven was to beat them. And the only game they lost, East Haven won 99 out of 100 games.
We're the only one.
We were the only one they won the state title with. Baseball, I'd have to say, 1960, we won a state championship. And gentlemen, George Krause and Bob Thibodeau, Judy's husband was on the team, Mike Crowley, and we won it. We beat Waterford in the state title, for the state title, and extra innings, and see some of those guys from Waterford still we bump into once in a while, and hey, you guys were lucky, 60 years later, And track, Stonington, the most victories Stonington has had, and it's been in track state championships, because they won all them, and then they won one in 56. That class won 3 state championships.
Wow.
Then came the girls' sports, Stonington, then right now, in that era, there was only like 4 or 5 sports. Now there's 19 to 20 sports. And you girls have done fabulous. Let's face it, they won state championships and great athletes and great students. They all going off to college and fantastic, and that's because of the Title IX in 1972. And they really, and they're doing good again this year. I hope they have this. I don't think they're going to have state tournament play,
Yeah.
but they've
After
really done
COVID.
great. They've really done great, and some great athletes. And on the Hall of Fame committee, we've started putting a lot of them in, because
good.
they really deserve it. And but I can go on and on and on. And
Will you tell us just a little fun fact that you found about the prize fighting?
yes. Well, when you talk about St. Michael's Arena, I first found out about it once I was on the police department, and we started the first police station I started working in. The first one in town of Stonington was on Liberty Street next to the firehouse. And I used to listen to the old timers talk about boxing and so forth, and Mr. Spellman was there, and Judge Purtle had an office 2 doors down, and I listened to them, and then I listened to my wife's uncle. He fought there, and a guy named Gil Culver, and so when I did all the research for the Hall of Fame and everything, you know, everything you crisscross here, crisscross there, so I got thinking about it, and I talked to Liz Wood. Liz Wood was the director of the Historical Society, very good, very intelligent girl. And she said, let's do an article, let's do something on it. And so I asked a few people, a lot of people didn't know about it. They didn't know anything about it, you know, they grew up in Pawcatuck, but it closed, you know. So we started doing it, and I got a hold of Mr. Spellman, and I got a hold of the Dominic DeGangi. He lived at 100 Stillman Avenue, and he was just a little boy then. And he said to me, hey David, he said, it was right behind my house. And the arena was right behind his house at 100 Stillman Avenue. You gotta remember, those houses weren't back there. Antoinette Street didn't exist then, River Street didn't exist. So it was on almost at the intersection of Antoinette Street and River Street. That's where the arena was. And they built this arena in 1928. St. Michael's, Knights of Columbus. I was thinking of the Holy Name Society, but Knights of Columbus built it. And they had it, and the first box was 1928, and it would sit 1,500 people.
That's huge.
And so they had a lot of people like Bob Weall, used to work for the town of Stonington. His father had a stable. They used to call them stables. And Tippy Salamino from Westerly, he was known. He was a trainer. Matter of fact, he trained Tarzan Brown, you know, the runner and so forth. And they had a boxing, a matter of fact, they had a boxing ring downstairs in the Westerly Library.
Oh.
And they boxed around in different areas, but St. Michael's Arena was the big one. And they had the Lorraine Club. There was an athletic club that sat between the old Yadney's and Cottrell's.
Oh,
It sat right there, and I think one time it was the Cottrell's house, and then they made it into an athletic club. So they trained there and trained in a lot of different places. And St. Michael's owned the property it was at the corner of Stillman Avenue and Liberty Street. The town of Stonington had that for a school for a while. It was a church, then it was a school, and Stonington moved out of it and sold it to St. Michael's. And then St. Michael's had it.
Okay.
When Palmer Street School opened up, and then Palmer Street School closed, and then went to West Broad.
Okay.
So they trained in all those places. And in Mystic, they had the Mystic Athletic Club. It was on Home Street, but it was on the water.
Oh, right.
There's only about one pylon left there I can find now, you know. And I remember being there, and then they tore it down in the 60s. And at the Stonington Community House, they did some boxing there. But the big place was St. Michael's Arena. And they had a lot of professional fights there and so forth. And there was a guy named Hookie Jackson. And a lot of those boxers changed their names because they were being pros and they didn't want to be known as pros, or they were worried about their parents finding out they were fighting. And, you know, and they changed their names. And they all went by, you know, it's hard to remember some of them now. But Mr. Spellman remembers it, and he helped his father carry wood to the place, and there was a guy named Connors, you know, that was related to the Connors and O'Brien and all, and it was quite a place. And then in the late, you know, 36, they stopped it. They were running out of fights, and they just came to an end.
Oh, that's a fun history, though.
Yeah, we did a program on it, and I have a lot of photos, and there was a professional fight there on Mystic Island. See, that's why they had it out there, because in 1887 they had a fight out there, but it was illegal to have it, so they had it off on the island. So they had that program, that fight there, and that's online, that is.
Oh, really?
And Liz Wood and myself did an article on the history of boxing, the prize fighting,
and we'll do a link to that at the bottom so people can read
you
learn more about it.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, thank you so much, Chief Erskine, for spending some time and all the research and history you dug up on the town. It's fascinating. So thank you.
Yeah, there is a lot, and I've enjoyed it, and I always thought a lot of Stonington. I I always think it's one of the best towns in the state.
I
do.
agree.
I do. I always tell the kids, the students at the high school,
They're lucky.
they're lucky to have this, all about, you know, libraries, and lucky to have this community.
Mhm.
And everybody from out of town's finding it.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome, and thank you for having me on.